'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the court, not a creature was stirring except some white supremacists butthurt. Praise be to the ancestors, they knew exactly what I wanted Christmas, to see a murdering white supremacist go to prison. You know, usually Santa puts toys or candy in your Christmas stocking, but in Kim Potter's case, it looks like old Saint Nick went out to the reindeer stables to get her gift. And it couldn't have happened to a nicer piece of trash. Kim Potter has been convicted in the murder of Dante Wright. And let's call it what it is. That was murder. But these white supremacists are taking that L real hard. I mean, just look at Kim Potter's own attorney, head down on the doggone table. That hurts. Typically, whenever a verdict gets handed in, the lawyers are always stoic and they got some patented line of BS to say. But in this case, these guys, they were so shocked by this one, they couldn't even hide it. They were like, oh, God, what just happened? Yeah, when these white supremacists take an L, they lose all their composure. But what shocked them is more and more people are showing they're seeing through the police's lies. All the stuff they used to get away with, it's not working anymore. The police are a bunch of racist liars, committing these murders and then trying to claim afterwards, it was an accident, because I was scared for my life is no longer useful anymore. They can't use that anymore. Nobody's trying to rely on that. Nobody's resorting to it because they know it doesn't work. That's how you know that it was a lie from the very beginning. If it wasn't a lie, why aren't they trying to use it? Because they know that they can't. It was a lie. They knew it when they said it. They just wanted to see how long they could get away with it. And the white media tried to help them out, tried to give that lie a new lease on life, but it just ain't working. So now they're going to another lie. They're trying to switch it up, switch it to something else. Since I was afraid for my life just isn't fooling anyone, and juries aren't playing along, and the media sees there's no more mileage to be had from it, we'll come up with something else. We're going to say that it was an accident. It's always an accident. I didn't intend to. It was unintentional. Yeah, well, these prison years you're about to do were intentional. Now, although the murderer of Dante Wright was arrested by the Washington County authorities, it was nonetheless Keith Ellison's state attorney general's office that took over the case and ultimately got the conviction. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering, what do I think of Keith Ellison in this case? Don't go making a saint out of a sinner. Keith Ellison has been far too soft on these white supremacist cops, as far as I'm concerned. At his press conference, first thing he's trying to do is to reassure the police, oh, we still love you now, we still love you. They don't need to be hearing that. These murdering scumbags need to be hearing, you've been getting away with murder for the longest time, and now, finally, some of you are going to prison. You deserve to be going to prison, and we're going to be locking up a hell of a lot more of you before it's all over. He needs to be calling out the fact that the police departments are full and overflowing with white supremacists. They have a white supremacist infestation. And he is going to be the exterminator. That's the only thing we should be hearing. Any of this garbage about, we want the cops to know this isn't about all of you. Man, forget about all that. I don't need to give some doggone disclaimer. Well, there are good cops. Well, what, all three of them? Give me a break. And by the way, Keith Ellison, I have to see a track record from him, something other than a murder that was caught on video. If the only time Keith Ellison finds his nerve to bring a case is when you have something that was egregious as hell and caught on video, that's the only time he finds his nerve, that ain't good enough. Now, I will say that the jury verdict was certainly a pleasant surprise. You had a jury that was overwhelmingly white, 9 white people, 2 Asians, and only 1 lonely black person. And you can tell that from the way the jury deliberated, it took them days to come to this guilty verdict. What does that tell you? What that tells you is the fact that they went from, Your Honor, we can't come to a unanimous verdict, to, okay, she's guilty on all counts. What that tells you is you had a couple of stealth white supremacists who were on that jury. You had a couple of stealth white supremacists who had gotten in there, who I would say the prosecution didn't do a strong enough job of weeding out the white supremacists during the voir dire process. For the juries to have done a 180 so quickly, to have gone from, Your Honor, we feel like we're hopelessly deadlocked, to less than 24 hours later, okay, we got a unanimous guilty verdict. For that kind of a 180 to have been done, what that tells me was that there was 1, at most, maybe 2 white supremacists who were trying to hold the line. 1, maybe 2 would-be white supremacist advocates in the jury who made up their minds that we're going to try to hang this jury and be home in time for Christmas. But apparently they were not able to convert any of the other jurors. And more importantly than that, they themselves wound up being the ones having to give way. I personally would very much like to know exactly what was going on during that deliberation process. What kind of dynamics were at play? I would like to know that. But that's a story for another day, I suppose. The murder of Dante Wright was committed in the middle of the Derek Chauvin trial. That's when this murder occurred. This didn't occur afterwards, it occurred during the middle of the murder trial. Every white supremacist with a badge in America knew how the Chauvin trial was going to turn out. A number of white supremacists with badges had been pulling sneak attacks on black citizens just to make it clear Chauvin may go down, but ain't nothing going to change. That was the message they were trying to send. What Kim Potter did was deliberate. You got a bunch of cops who were all over Dante Wright. You had like 3 or 4 officers there, and only one of them thinks, oh, I need to pull my gun in this case. And she's supposed to be a training officer or something. That's garbage. She knew exactly what she was doing. That's the reason why the first words came out of her mouth were, oh my God, I'm going to prison. Yeah, that's what they do whenever they murder a black person. They immediately go into their best phony play acting. Oh, I can't believe, I thought it was my gun. I thought it was my taser. I just knew it was my taser. I didn't know. He, he. That's what they do. It's the same thing when they say stop resisting when they're beating someone or pull their gun and shoot someone. Oh, you stop resisting. They do their little play acting for the cameras. This is what these little cop seminars teach them, by the way. When you got terrorist organizations like the Fraternal Order of Punks, police, who make sure they bring in white supremacist lawyers to coach the cops on what to say. Don't just say that you didn't see a weapon. Say you were afraid for your life, so it doesn't matter if you saw one or not. There was a Supreme Court ruling. That's what they pay for. They pay for these little seminars so they can bring in some paid lawyers who will coach the police on what to say. Because that's what the entire reason is that they do. We're going to make sure that we got something to hang a hat on. The white media will go along with it. Why? They won't question anything because they're in it with us. We're all on the same team against black people. And part of what they're coached on doing is make sure that when you got your dashboard cameras on, your body cameras on, make sure that you do your best play acting. Oh, you better make a show of it because you're going to need that later on. You're going to need it later on. Make sure that you put your head in your hands or something. These bastards, they ain't sorry for anything they've done. Kim Potter tried to put on her best performance, but the jury gave her acting thumbs down. They convicted her on both manslaughter charges. They said not all this was intentional, unintentional, any other thing you got. Oh, this scares the white supremacists. This got the white supremacists shook. Because they just knew that in a case like this, in this case, why, she's a white woman. And on top of that, this was not a case of putting your full weight on someone's neck or something. Why? She thought that she was going for a taser. Surely that's an excuse. That'll work, right? And they saw that it didn't work. That's got them scared. Because this was supposed to be the new fallback position. The new fallback position was going to be, it wasn't intentional. Why? You can't send them to prison. It can only be sent to prison if you can prove that it was intentional. That was going to be the new talking point. Yeah, the white supremacists went from banging their chest like Tarzan to all of a sudden they're huffing and kicking the ground and swinging at the air and gnashing their rotten teeth. All of these racists, they went from crowing and bragging that no court would convict them for killing a black person to now whining and crying that a white supremacist can't get a fair trial anymore. Listen to them now. Oh, all of a sudden we don't see commentators and talking heads saying, we may disagree with the verdict, but it's the only legal system we got. So, in other words, the same mocking response that they've always given to black people for 500 years. We don't hear them saying it. Oh, nobody's saying that they accept the jury's verdict at all. They're not accepting anything. None of them are demanding that their ignorant racist cohorts respect the process. No respect for the majesty of law, no respect for the rule of law, no respecting the jury's verdict. You weren't in that jury deliberation. We don't know what happened in the jury deliberation. We have to respect the verdict. Oh, no, they ain't respecting nothing. Because as far as they were concerned, in a case like this, they thought they had some wiggle room. Oh, you got 9 white jurors. And she says that she thought she pulled her taser instead of her gun. Why? There should be a slam dunk. And the white media was largely ignoring it, hoping it would fall down the memory hole. And now it's just come back up, and they're looking and going, man, how could this have happened? Racists like Jeffrey Toobin have been saying for years that, juries just trust the police, he would say with a smile. Juries just trust the police, you see. The right wing nuts like Sean Hannity used to strut and smile and say that the cops would never get convicted because they had been overcharged. That had always been the battle cry of the white media, left and right. You heard it from CNN as much as Fox News. You heard it from MSNBC as much as Newsmax. Hell, the so-called leftist media was saying, well, overcharging, you see, overcharging. You notice how they don't drop that lie. You notice how you haven't heard them saying the overcharged line anymore. You haven't heard that in a while, have you? That was the narrative they pushed, not because it was true, but because as the white media, it's their job to control society through the use of narratives expedient to white power. That's their job. Their job is to concoct narratives that are going to promote and support and preserve white supremacy. But they also have to be able to adapt to a public that's decided to abandon or turn its back on their narratives. They don't keep just banging the drum when one narrative fails. They don't keep banging the drum hoping that it'll come back. You got to switch it up. You got to shift to something else. Because when the public has rejected a white media narrative, the white media knows that they've got to pivot. They got to change, go to something else. They can't just keep hammering that same point. It just simply destroys what little pretension of credibility they may hope to have. Oh, and on a side note, I had some clown saying, you don't see white people rioting after the Potter verdict. Now, I could give the rundown about white college kids rioting at pumpkin festivals, but instead I'll give a less snarky response, and I'll say this. The reason you never see white people rioting after a racist gets convicted is because even they know the killer is guilty. We're not going to play this game where we pretend as if the dominant societies have the same experience that we've had. People get angry whenever you see someone who you know to be guilty allowed to walk and you know that the process was dirty as hell. You don't ever really see anybody rioting when an innocent person goes to prison. Even if it's somebody who you know is innocent, you're shocked, you're disgusted, but you don't decide there's going to be a riot. You riot when there's been a murder, when someone's been killed and the killer is walking. That's when you riot. And that being the case, there would be no justification for it. And even white people know there would be no basis for it. That's the reason why you never see it. So don't ever let anyone pull that, well, you don't see white people rioting nonsense. Because there's a good reason for it, and we all know what it is. These racists are trying to conceal their fear behind some phony veneer of cheap skepticism. After a lifetime of being conditioned to think that some people's privilege gives them a license to kill, or at least to kill black people, they're now seeing that black people's demands are revoking that license. Well, at least for some of them. That's the reason why you don't see Sean the Pawn Hannity talking about overcharged. The white media ain't talking that mess anymore. That's the reason why you don't see them saying, well, sooner or later, people are we're going to start trusting the police again. No, they ain't trying that mess. They're not doing any of that usual stuff. Instead, what's happening is they're trying to find a way to pivot away from it to get to something else. All the garbage about, well, if a cop says that they're scared for their life, why, that's a bulletproof defense. And here's the case law behind it. They're not talking that mess anymore either. And defense attorneys know better than to try it. They're abandoning all the old talking points. It's as I've always told you, when we start defeating these scumbags, don't ever look for them to ever confess that they've been defeated. Instead, listen for the sweet sound of silence. The white supremacists only have a few plays in the playbook, and that's because when you've achieved supremacy in the society, when you've monopolized all the resources and taken over all the apparatuses of the state, then what happens is you don't need to have a deep playbook. You don't need to have 1,000 plays. Only 1 or 2 will be enough because you've got white supremacist fiat. You can just say, I'm white and I say so. So you don't require a bunch of plays. So that's the reason why taking their tools away from them, breaking their little excuses. These are defeats that they're not able to come back from, or at least not able to come back from easily, because it's not like they've got a whole bunch of things racked up. They don't, because they've never had to. It was TBA who quoted some spokesperson for the NRA as saying that the reason that they have to go to court all the time and they have to defeat any and every attempt to try to rein in the assault rifles and such, as the guy said, every victory fuels the next victory, and every defeat fuels the next defeat. And as a white supremacist organization, the NRA ought to know. Now, as the L's continue to pile up, even the admittedly meager handful that we've got so far, these morons have been losing their minds. Now the clowns have been used to saying, well, maybe it'll get overturned on appeal. It's going to get overturned on appeal, you know. That's the last hope of the hopeless. The trash are desperately hoping that the racist judges on the bench, their last ditch, will simply ignore the law and rule in their favor. That's what this is about to them now. Oh yeah, they're looking to go with these juries. These juries, oh my God, we see the trend forming here. Yeah, they see exactly the trend that's formed. Though you'll notice that even false news, Fox News, isn't pushing that line. Even Fox, as divorced from reality as that cesspool is, even they're not trying to hold out hope that the conviction of Kim Potter is going to get overturned. You want to know why? As the black media has pointed out in recent weeks, the convictions of these race soldiers are being upheld by the appellate courts. The convictions are sticking. These convictions aren't getting overturned. See, that's what the white supremacists, the cops, and all the rest of these garbage men, they sit here and say, it's going to be overturned on appeal. It'll be overturned on appeal. Don't worry, it's going to be overturned on appeal. The conviction was mob rule, but the appellate court won't be scared. They're not going to be scared. They're not part of the mob. It's going to get overturned on appeal. But when we look, we see that it hasn't been happening. The appellate courts have been upholding the convictions, not reversing them. Jason Van Dyke, who murdered Laquan McDonald in Chicago, he was going to win on appeal. While you had all the thugs in the white media and online saying, no cops have been convicted of murder and the ones, they're going to, don't worry, they're going to overturn us on appeal. Don't worry, this is Illinois. You know how it is. But the courts have turned Van Dyke down flat. Van Dyke's own lawyers are tired of defending him. They've been so demoralized that Van Dyke's own attorneys were the ones who filed the motion to drop his appeals. They're no longer going to be fighting his conviction. They have accepted that the scumbag will have to do his time. So that conviction has been upheld, and all the pathetic hopes of getting it reversed have been abandoned by Van Dyke himself. And Van Dummy wasn't the only one. The murderer Amber Geiger has also been sent packing by the Texas appellate courts. They threw her appeal out. So that conviction has been upheld as well. Remember, all the white supremacists who tried to console themselves with the lie that white privilege had to kick in sooner or later, and the appellate courts would be on code because they realized they can't count on the juries to ignore the law anymore. Well, none of them want to talk about Amber Geiger. None of them are even saying, oh, what a travesty. It was just an accident. It wasn't deliberate. They're not trying it. Every time they try that mess, they'll do it. But as soon as the conviction comes in, all of a sudden they drop that mess. They certainly don't say it when it comes time to talk about appeals. None of these white supremacists are talking about Amber Geiger. Hell, they don't even want to complain about it. Michael Slager, who murdered Walter Scott, shooting him in the back 5 times as he was running away, that animal has also been trying to appeal his conviction, and the federal court threw that one out as well. You'll be delighted to know that Slager tried to argue that he didn't have adequate counsel. And he also says his attorney didn't tell him about a possible federal plea before his sentencing. And speaking of federal pleas, that brings us to the putrid pile of inbred crap, Derek Chauvin. Earlier this month, that degenerate piece of filth pleaded guilty in federal court, not only to violating George Floyd's rights by murdering him, but also to the attempted killing of a black teenager that he committed as well. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for that. Of course, his real motivation was to get the hell out of the Minnesota state prison system, where some of the people he railroaded or assaulted could get to him. He could have applied for parole in less than 15 years under his state sentence, but I think he realized he probably wouldn't last that long. So now he's pleaded to the federal charges, and he'll have to serve at least 20 years of that 25-year sentence before he sees daylight again. So this is the reason why you don't see the mainstream or even the broadcast right media saying any nonsense about appeals. Oh yeah, they've been watching this because the thing is, if you're going to bring up appeals, well, you would have to point to all of these other high-profile killings of black people by the police. How did it turn out for any of those guys? Any of those guys get out of prison? Any of those convictions been successfully overturned? Hell, have any of the sentences even been so much as reduced by a single day? Not even one. So they understand that when these scumbags wind up getting convicted, they're going to have to do their time. There's not going to be some appeal that gets them out. They can have daydreams and they can go ahead and have delusions about that all day long. But the ones who actually are supposed to know the law, they're not going to be talking about that because the problem that they have is exactly a matter of credibility. They know that if they start running around doing loose talk about, well, what are the chances on appeal? Well, surely this will get overturned on appeal. That might be stuff that makes the white supremacists feel better. But ultimately, as the appeals cases get knocked down, they're going to have to report, no, these sentences are sticking. So they're like, we're just not going to talk about it. We're going to pretend as if we don't know anything about it. Better to just keep the delusion alive than to prove it a lie outright. But that's not to say the white right hate machine is simply going to resign themselves to being punished. Seeing that juries are no longer so willing to let the police off the hook and that the appellate courts are not throwing out these verdicts, now you got the white right clearly signaling what their next move is going to be. Shyster extraordinaire Jonathan Turley was on Fox, and he was saying that the laws need to be changed. Sure, he gave one or two throwaway mentions to the jury, but the main gist of his little tirade was the law's got to be changed. Now, of course, if you're going to tell a lie like that, you're going to have to try to hang your hook on something. So what he says is, well, the laws regarding manslaughter are too vague. The wording's too vague. It's not specific enough. That's a bald-faced lie. Because when you look at what it is that he actually wants, it's not specificity, it's loopholes. Loopholes means vagueness. The jury in the Kim Potter trial applied the law precisely the way that it was written. And that's Turley's problem. This is how white supremacy operates. Whenever they win, none of them says, well, the laws need to be changed anyway. There's still a problem with the laws. They don't have a problem with the laws when it goes their way. No matter how circumstantial the evidence may be, no matter how outrageous a technicality may be called for, whenever they get a verdict that they like, none of them ever says, well, I agree with the verdict, though I do feel that the case law was shaky and that needs to be addressed. They never say that. It's only when the law punishes a white supremacist or whenever a black person is acquitted, all of a sudden we hear the whining and nagging chorus of, we need to change the laws. And that's what Fox News is saying. And they're not just saying it for nothing. This stuff is coming from shadowy white supremacists behind the scenes. These think tanks and so-called public policy institutes and other rich white supremacist terrorist organizations, when you see shyster hacks like Jonathan Turley on Fox saying that the laws need to be changed, that didn't just come from nowhere. And what does that tell you? This wasn't just something that came out of his pea brain on a moment's notice. These white supremacists, they rely on white legal immunity from law to keep themselves out of prison. If white immunity from law breaks down for one of them, then there's nothing stopping all of them from having to have a prison cell right beside Chauvin, Van Dyke, Slager, Geiger, and now Potter. The racist propagandists at Fox understand full well that the appellate courts aren't going to be of much help, so now they're advocating to change the laws. What they want are for the laws to be made more vague, add some loopholes, do something that would make it where all the police have to do is claim something was an accident and there would be no trial, because that was the lie that this Turley character was pushing. Well, the question isn't whether or not the person was negligent, but the question is whether or not the person meant to. It's a question of intent, you see, a question of intent. You can't say they were reckless. This was a case of negligence, but not reckless. That's why this should be something for civil court. This shouldn't even make it to a criminal court. It should be a civil issue. Doesn't that sound a lot like what happened with Ashley Hall? Well, we don't need to have a trial. What we need is a restorative justice hearing. Ashley Hall was shot in the back in Ladue, Missouri by a white female cop. Looks like a slightly younger version of Kim Potter, by the way. And what was her excuse? I thought that I grabbed my taser. So it doesn't matter if they're standing right in front of you or if someone is running away. It's always a circumstance of I don't know what side my taser is on. That's the excuse they use every single time because they know that they're lying. They just want to see if anyone's going to call them on it. Because in most cases, they roll the dice and they get away with it. Notice that none of them are saying, I fear for my life. None of them are even asking, well, whatever happened to I feared for my life? Yeah, they get it. They know that's not going to work anymore. So now they're floating this new pathetic trial balloon. Well, it's accidental. It's always an accident. You can't charge them with recklessness. You can say that they were negligent, perhaps, but not reckless. The real problem for them is that juries aren't buying their lies. No amount of legal loopholes can overcome that. Now, this Turley character, who's supposed to be a law professor, by the way, and I feel sorry for anyone unfortunate enough to have this mental midget for a teacher, as a law professor, he understands what his suggestion is meant to do. He sees which way the winds of change are blowing. Like the rest of these white supremacists, he understands that they can't rely on jury nullification anymore. They can't rely on stealth jurors to get into the jury room. They can't rely on jurors to wholesale ignore the law. Sure, it will still continue to happen. That's not in doubt. Sure, it's going to continue to happen. But the problem is they can't rely on it. And who wants to roll the dice and bet that they're going to be the next ones who the jury looks at and says, you know what, the case law is clear on this, you're going to prison? Who's going to want to roll the dice on that? There may be ones who are willing to, but at the end of the day, if it keeps happening enough times, even the ones who feel very adventurous, they're going to start to lose their nerve. They also understand that the appellate courts are upholding these verdicts. Notice how Turley, who's supposed to be a law professor, though you couldn't tell by listening, he never mentions even once how all these high-profile convictions are being upheld on appeal. As an alleged law professor, he certainly is aware of this fact, yet he doesn't dare mention it. Why? Because what Turley's saying is not legal analyses, it is in fact a legislative demand being given on the part of the white media to all of these Republican-controlled state legislatures to try to concoct some legal language. We need to prop up the thugs in blue. People are not going to believe any of that garbage about you are afraid for your life, so we need something else. This is sending up a distress signal, a big, huge SOS signal to all of these racist politicians and these state legislatures. You guys got to do something. That's what these racists are hoping to set up. Since jury nullification is becoming much harder to come by, the goal now is to manufacture some jurist nullification. It's the appellate courts that they're aiming at. They're trying to get their mojo back. They're trying to get some sort of counteroffensive started. And they're realizing that as they've lost more and more ground with the public at large, now they're going to have to go to the places where they actually have the ability to install their white supremacists, where they can actually choose who the white supremacists are who are going to be controlling the levers of power in those cases. That's the reason why you have organizations like the Federalist Society, who spend so much time vetting individuals who the Republicans put on the federal bench. That's the reason why they spend so much time with that. That's what the Federalist Society does. They have picked all of these Republicans, at least from the Republican side of the aisle. It's the Federalist Society who goes and vets these guys and has these little off-the-record conversations with them so they can feel them out on right-wing issues. And this is basically what you see Fox News setting up here when it comes to the police. All these little asinine yes men and these professional suck-up punks that you see writing these articles, or even who are posting comments online about that. Please don't think that these are just some disinterested bystanders or just some ignorant rubes. Many of them are, but not all of them. A lot of these people who you see leaving comments online, these are card-carrying white supremacists. They're trying to get something going. That's what they're hoping to do. They're trying to get some momentum here. They're trying to get a head of steam, trying to get something going is what they're doing. A lot of these people you see leaving comments, these people in many cases are career white supremacist operatives. We found that out with Tucker Carlson, when one of his writers was exposed as being an anti-black racist who would post tirades on a message board. Now, he did it under a pseudonym, thinking nobody would ever figure out who he was, but he was eventually found out. And the thing is, these clowns, they don't want to work anonymously. They want people to know who they are. And we all know that his identity was no secret to Tucker Carlson. Hell, that's the reason why Fox News hired him, precisely because he was an anti-black racist. That's the reason why when Fox was forced to have to at least put this guy on the sideline, Tucker Carlson didn't even apologize for him. Instead, he gave nothing but a defense of that scumbag. But guess what? The writers for CNN and MSNBC, they're no less racist. Their broadcasting is only slightly, very slightly, less racist than the crap at Fox, but as far as I'm concerned, that's the distinction without a difference. All of this fear that you see, all of this response, this has been a reaction to the trend that has unquestionably formed. They now realize that the Chauvin case wasn't some flash in the pan. They desperately needed for all of this to run its course, to run out of steam and go away with Chauvin being arrested. They were hoping they would get him off at trial, but that didn't happen. And worse than that, it began to spread. The cops getting arrested and being convicted. The hope was that people would see Chauvin get convicted. The public would feel some sort of catharsis. The public's attention would move on to something else. And the issue of punishing the police would fall down the memory hole and things would go back to the way they always were. Except that's not what happened. The public hasn't let it go. Worse, the punishments for the police are getting stronger, not weaker. Jim Crow Joe declared that he had lied about ever wanting a police task force. As far as I'm concerned, his saying that he was punting it to Congress, that's a declaration that, yeah, well, when I said there would be a presidential level police accountability commission, I lied. His goal, the entire goal from the beginning, was to preserve the government's protection for the murderers with badges. Well, the public is showing that even without Biden's empty police reform commission, without a single city or state outlawing qualified immunity, the citizens are holding the police accountable. It just goes to show what the black media has been telling you all along. The problem has not been qualified immunity. It's not been some legal statute that's been the problem. The problem is you've got corrupt DAs who refuse to prosecute. You've got them working hand in hand with the defense and with these racist judges to engineer acquittals for the sake of hopefully getting the public to stop this. That's what it's been about. It's been a massive campaign across the board at all levels of government to try to demoralize the public and get the public to give up on punishing the thugs with badges. And the public has said, forget it, our will is stronger than yours. So hold this L, you bastards. Now, family, before we go getting carried away, the professor does need to bring the cold water. The typical lie that we hear from the white supremacists lately has been the cops are going to be scared to do their job, etc., etc. If you don't let us kill black people with impunity, then the cops are going to be scared to do their jobs. Why? They'll be resigning en masse. They've been saying that crap, and of course, there have been no mass resignations. And as the New York Times has reported, even after the murder of George Floyd, the police killings of black people are as high as they've ever been. Oh, all these white supremacists with badges, they haven't been moderating their behavior at all. They've been going on as if nothing has been happening. Because if the police were so scared of a biased public, if they were so terrified that they would be dragged into court for just doing their job, then why is it that they haven't stopped the killings of black people? For a bunch of cowardly scumbags who are so scared that they're going to be dragged into court for any little thing, they sure do seem eager to kill as many black people as they can before they go to court. The thugs with badges are not scared at all, and that's something that we have to make sure that we understand. We have to be very careful not to let the white media convince us that we've been winning some sort of across-the-board victories. There have been small, very small steps taken. And let's not give any credit to Joe Biden's Injustice Department. Merrick Garland has been working against the interest of punishing the police from the jump. As the white media had to admit, it was the Justice Department's idea that Derek Chauvin's sentence should be served concurrently with his state time. It was the prosecutors who requested that. You got the guy dead to rights, the most infamous murder of the 21st century so far, and yet you got prosecutors saying, well, let's cut this guy a break. You got him dead to rights. He'll have to eat whatever sentence you recommend. So you recommend, let's give him as little time as we think we can get away with and not have the public furious with us. I'll bet you any amount of money that it was Merrick Garland's idea that Derek Chauvin's federal plea deal should run concurrently with his state sentence. That's what they did. They made it a concurrent sentence. They said, well, you know what? He'll go ahead and check in a federal prison, and we'll have him serve that time concurrently with his state sentence. They should have automatically, as a no-brainer, said, no, he's going to have to serve it consecutively. That means as soon as he checks out of state prison, he immediately checks into federal prison. So please don't go thinking to yourself that, oh, well, Joe Biden, they're trying. The hell they are. They've been running a prevent defense for these white supremacists from day one. I hate to lay these negative vibes on you, but this is the reality. As Neely Fuller always said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. That way, they always guarantee they win, or at the very least, that they mitigate their losses. So far, we've gone from 0 police ever being convicted to basically a comparative handful. And we have to be honest about that fact. When they sit there and say, oh, there's more being convicted now than ever before, well, there was 0 being convicted before now. So even 1 would be a massive improvement. We need for the thugs with badges to be hemmed up and hauled before the courts every minute of every day. We need convictions every day of the week. What's happened so far can only most charitably be described as a good start, but not good enough. It's a drop in the bucket. A drop in a very large bucket. We got a lot of work ahead of us. We've shown that we can outlast the bastards, but we got to make sure we got the staying power for it. That's why you can have all these white supremacists doing these phony kvetchings and hysterics, but the cops are going to be scared to do their jobs. Their job is to kill the niggers, and they're going to be scared to kill the niggers. They're doing that because they're thinking to themselves that they're going to be safe in this lie. They're thinking to themselves that, well, we already know that for every one cop who actually gets taken to trial and convicted, there's at least 10,000 who do not. It is the epitome of white supremacist propaganda to maintain their advantage by screaming at the top of their lungs that they have no advantage. The white supremacists hate taking an L. That's why it's so sweet to see them sitting here rolling on the ground and bawling like babies. Just a few days ago, the white supremacists were celebrating that the mass shooting punk Rittenhouse was the guest of dishonor at one of their racist rallies. And then 24 hours later, they're now screaming that the world is coming to an end. While this 180 is certainly good to see, let's not take it too far, family. Let's not start letting the white media convince us that, oh, things are trending in the right direction. They're only going to go in that direction if we push it in that direction. And we got to make sure there's a landslide. Their fear is that the trend of these race killers being held accountable isn't going to let up. It's not going to slow down. But that depends entirely on what we do. The street marches are largely gone and the uprisings have abated, but the thugs with badges are still getting convicted. But we need more, a lot more. While it was good to see that a predominantly white jury came back with the right verdict, it's as I've always told you, justice is far too important to be left up to chance. I want to take a moment to recognize some of our contributors: Helena Edwards, John Harvin, Amber, Osiris Sprav, Quentin Cook, and Melvinia Miles. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black media only exists because of you.